ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Cars That Diecast For channel. I want to thank you all for watching, and in this video I have a very special presentation to showcase to you all, and that is what I consider to be the complete set, and I'll elaborate on that here in a second, of the 2001 Press Pass Signings Blue Signature Autograph line. Now this is a set that has been in the making for well over 8 months, if not well over a year, and finally I have completed, again, as what I consider to be a complete set, and I'm so happy that I'm going to have the opportunity now to be able to showcase every autograph from this fine line. Now the reason why I say that this is a complete set in my own mind is that when you look at the checklist, there are still 2 autographs that are missing in action. It's one driver and one crew chief, and those autographs belong to Steve Park and to Greg Zipadelli, who was the crew chief for Tony Stewart. Now, after evaluating well over 15 years worth of eBay auctions and looking at various websites and forums and everything else, I cannot find a single image of either one of those autographs. So the only thing that I can do after surmising all this is that simply either one of 2 things are occurring. Either those 2 autographs were short printed all around, or they were somehow included in a checklist but weren't eventually produced in autograph form. Now with that said though, if you have pictures of either one of those autographs, and especially if you want to sell, because I'm definitely ready to buy, I am more than willing to accept those images and to post them up onto my Flickr album that will correlate with the release, or rather the showcase, of all these autographs here. So again, if you have them for sale, I'd love to buy them, but even if you don't want to sell them but you have images of those 2 remaining autographs, I would love to be able to have it and allow it to be utilized as a resource over on my Flickr for as long as that Flickr account remains active. So with that said though, ladies and gentlemen, we're just going to go through every autograph, give a little bit of insight into each driver's 2001 season, and of course the big elephant in the room, again, as this is a 2001 series autograph. We know what happened at the beginning of the 2001 season. Dale Earnhardt Sr. was killed. And this here, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is the first autograph line that does not include Dale Earnhardt Sr. So if you're trying to wait for that Dale Earnhardt Sr. autograph to pop up, it will not be present in this video. So with that said though, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and put these stacks back to where they belong and go one by one as we go through this wonderful autograph set. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to showcase the autographs essentially in alphabetical order based off of last name. But with that said though, there are a couple drivers that we will save as their special drivers for the very end. So our first autograph here is going to be of John Andretti, and it's important to recognize that this is going to be a set that will be reaching its 20-year anniversary here soon, and unfortunately we will have several other drivers, as we talked about with Dale Earnhardt Sr. His autograph is completely absent. We're going to have several drivers who have since died since the making of this set, and John Andretti unfortunately is one of those drivers. Died of colon cancer not too long ago as of the posting of this video, and at the time in 2001 he was driving the Cheerios Dodge for Richard Petty in the 43 car, and he had some success, I suppose. He did finish second at Bristol that year in the spring race behind Elliott Sadler. As for his career in total with Richard Petty Motorsports, he did win the 99 Martinsville race with the STP colors, driving the Pontiac 43 car. But beyond that though, in fact I believe also in 97 he won the Daytona 400 race, the summer race, with Cale Yarborough's, one of Richard Petty's top competitors, as his only win as a Cup Series owner. But beyond that though, after 2001, I think John Andretti's career would be one of those drivers where it would get on a downward slope. I believe the late 90s is where he peaked, and that pretty much will say it for John Andretti. But gone too soon, and this is one of the autographs, unfortunately, that will be featuring a driver that has since passed away. So with that said though, let's go ahead and go to the next autograph. All right, this autograph here would be for perhaps, in terms of a hype type deal, might be what many would consider a Kyle Busch caliber hype. But of course, he would never master that hype into reality. It's Casey Atwood. Casey Atwood was the teammate in 2001 to Bill Elliott, who saw a resurgence in his career, but for Casey Atwood saw the complete decimation, I think, in my opinion, of his career. He was a young gun in the Busch series, driving the number 27 Castrol GTX car. I believe he had a big flip at Daytona, so you might remember him from that. But this guy here had a lot of hype. He was driving as young as 16, I believe, in the Busch series and maybe even the truck series. And when it came to Cup time, he just did not produce the results. I think he had one third-place finish at Homestead or something like that. But beyond that, though, that was pretty much it. He drove a satellite team, the number 7 Sirius car, I believe, the following year. But then after that, I mean, he was just really just whoever would accept him as a driver, that is where he would drive. And that's pretty much will do it for the eventual journeyman driver of Casey Atwood. As a young gun, had a lot of promise, but unfortunately when it came to actually producing, it did not happen. Next autograph to showcase will be for Greg Biffle, who I believe at the time was peaking and in his career into the from the early to mid 2000s. He won the 2000 Truck Series Championship by a large margin over his teammate Kurt Busch. I believe in 2001 he made the switch over to the Busch Series, driving the number 60 car, and I believe, if I remember, he may have been close to a championship contender that year. The following year in 2002 would be his championship year, though, but as for 2001, he was still a viable candidate for a good Cup ride, which he would eventually get. He would stay with Jack Roush throughout the Truck Series and Busch Series and into the mid to late 2000s with Jack Roush, and have some pretty good success, I believe, peaking in the mid 2000s and then starting to slowly die out. But still a very solid driver for Greg Biffle. He didn't have that megastar pizzazz that you really could sell, I believe, but overall this was a guy who just pretty much was a race car driver. But as for a superstar, the appeal, the look, I don't think he really had it. But really, to be honest, it's about the results, and this guy was a multi-time winner in Cup. So Greg Biffle's autograph in this set. Next autograph will belong to Dave Blaney. He is the father of Ryan Blaney, for those of you who may be wondering. He had just another journeyman driver race career, I believe. He did not win any races. However, in the spring race at Atlanta, where Kevin Harvick and Jeff Gordon had the side-by-side finish, he was actually the dominant car of that race, and probably had the race won had it not been for his pit crew not correctly applying the lug nuts to one of the wheels, which would eventually fall off as he was leaving pit road. And beyond that, though, I think he did have some success the following year in 2002 under the 77 car. In fact, I think at one point they even had to hire a second publicist because he was finishing pretty good, but then as he would falter, they had to let that person go because all the notoriety pretty much fell off for him. And then after that, it was pretty much journeyman driver, and that's pretty much will do it for Dave Blaney. This is his autograph in this set, and nothing too much else to say. Here we go with the next autograph, and this autograph right here, not so much because it's Brett Bodine. This autograph here, I believe, will show one of the faults of the stock of this card, or perhaps because it is showing its age, in that you will see, if you look at the autograph here, it does look it doesn't look blue, for one. It looks very dried out. The card itself looks very faded. These cards appear to be very sensitive if you were to leave them out in the sunlight or direct light for quite a bit. So if you do end up scoring any of these autographs, you want to make sure that you're not displaying it in direct sunlight, or else you'll have a situation like this where the card appears to be faded, aged, and the autograph begins to look very faded. In fact, I have a replacement autograph on the way here, but this is for Brett Bodine, who I believe now is the main pace car driver for NASCAR, and As of 2001, 2002, and I believe in the 2003, he was a Cup owner driving for himself, and the team just never really gained much success. I believe he did have a solid 10th place finish at a New Hampshire race at the end of 2001, but after that he would just really be trying to survive, and eventually would have to drop out as a driver and as a team owner, and as I said, has become, I believe, the primary pace car driver for NASCAR. So this is Brett Bodine's addition into this set. And of course, we can't forget, if we're talking about the Bodines, we have Tom Bodine here, who is driving for the number 66 Big K Ford, which he took over from the retired Darrell Waltrip. And this guy here actually had some decent success from a pole standpoint, and actually would lead several races, I believe, throughout the year, but just could not make out with the good finishes. Travis Carter Racing, this would be the last full-time year, I believe. As the following year, they intended to race the whole season, but if you guys remember Kmart, this was the year that Kmart pretty much went belly up, and this was the first of eventually many years where you would see just the destruction of what used to be one of the most popular, competitors to Walmart and Kmart. In fact, they had to drop the sponsorship only 2 races into the following season in 2002 after signing Joe Nemechek to a contract, and then having to let him go after 2 races when Jimmy Spencer, as we would see his autograph later on, would leave to go start the Target car over at Chip Ganassi Racing. But nonetheless, though, Tom Bodine, journeyman driver, but did have some good success, I believe, in the Truck Series, winning multiple championships, if I'm not mistaken. And so here we go, Tom Bodine's addition into this set. Now here is one of the last 3 autographs, I believe, that I finally was able to collect as I was completing this set here. This took quite some time in order to secure. It's the autograph for Jeff Burton. Jeff Burton, who had been driving with the X-Side colors. All of a sudden, I'm not sure exactly why, but I think the last 7 races or so, or maybe even a couple more, maybe last 10 races of the 2000 campaign, all of a sudden they switched to the Citgo sponsorship. In fact, both the Wood brothers and Elliott Sadler's car and Jeff Burton's car would both have Citgo sponsorship, as X-Side, I believe, just backed off completely. I'm not sure exactly what all the details was of that, but 2001 would be a steady year for Jeff Burton. I think he peaked probably around 98, 99, even a little bit into 2000. He would finish 3rd in the points in 2000. However, he came into the race, the last race at Atlanta, in 2nd, but I guess he didn't have a good race, and Dale Earnhardt overtook him for the 2nd position in points. But he would win the Coca-Cola 600, I believe, in 2001, and he would have some more success, but he would never be a real championship contender. I think in 2005 was probably his best shot at a title. He was the points leader coming into the relatively new championship series, and he was the points leader in the first couple races, but then would falter. But Jeff Burton, consistent driver, multiple time wins, multiple time Winston No Bull winner, so he came out pretty good, and I believe he is now an announcer, an analyst, if you will, for NBC Sports in their coverage of NASCAR. If you're going to talk about Jeff, you got to talk about Ward Burton. Ward Burton, famous, probably his most popular ride, I believe, is with the Caterpillar vehicle in 2001. It was a Dodge with Bill Davis Racing. I know in 2002 he would win the Daytona 500 and also a New Hampshire race, but then after that his career pretty much went downhill after that. As for 2001, I don't necessarily remember how successful his campaign was. I know in 2000 he finished in the top 10 in points, and really, to be honest, he won multiple races, of course, with the Daytona 500 win being his biggest. But beyond that, though, I think I would classify him more as just a steady hand driver who eventually became a journeyman driver, but he did have many moments of success. I think he won a Darlington race as well, so he had some success certainly, but at the same time he wasn't ever a championship contender. But nonetheless, though, even though his brother Jeff really doesn't speak with that southern drawl, Ward does certainly, so you could tell that they were, as Jeff would say, he was raised in the southern side of the house. So here's Ward Burton's autograph into this line.
I wish I had something like a shot to the window.
And here we go now with Kurt Busch's autograph into this line, and as you could tell by the uniform, he started the 2001 season without any real sponsorship. In fact, he was probably the last driver that Dale Earnhardt had a really big problem with before he was killed in his accident. He infamously gave Kurt Busch the middle finger during the Daytona 500 race. He did have some success throughout the 2001 year for a rookie, but then of course he would start peaking in the mid-2000s, of course winning the 2004 championship. But as for 2001, I think had it not been for Kevin Harvick really just lighting the world on fire, doing the double duty deal after taking over Dale Earnhardt's ride, he would be considered a solid rookie for 2001. But nonetheless though, future champion, and of course the many ups and downs of his career for Kurt Busch, and this is his autograph, one of his earliest autographs in his trading card career. Here we go now with Stacy Compton. The best thing I remember from him from 2001 is that I believe he was the actual pole sitter or the outside pole sitter, I forgot which one, for the 2001 Daytona 500. And as you can see here with the Melling identification there, he was actually sponsored by Kodiak Tobacco. And this is actually one of the last years that I would see. In fact, I think this is the last year that Kodiak, which had won the championship with Rusty Wallace back in 1989 and had been on the Ricky Craven car when he had that flip at Talladega, this would be the last year you would see that as a sponsorship. And of course this would be the evolution of tobacco sponsorship, as they would have more restrictions and would not be allowed to sponsor essentially in sports pretty much. And eventually, as we would see in 2003, Winston actually being pretty much given the boot in a way from actually sponsoring in NASCAR. And so beyond that though, that pole position or that outside pole position, there really wasn't a whole lot else to talk about Stacy Compton, and that will do it for his autograph line. And here we go now, speaking of Ricky Craven, here is his addition to this line. He took over the number 32 Tide Ford from Scott Pruitt, who drove the year before and really did not perform at all hardly with that vehicle. In 2001, the fall Martinsville race, which I believe was rain delayed, he had that excellent battle with Dale Jarrett and actually came out on top. So I think in a way Ricky Craven actually peaked. Although it wasn't a really hard peak in terms of consistency, he would win a couple races in the early 2000s. Of course, I think his most famous was the second victory he had, where he won that side-by-side battle with Kurt Busch, which I believe might still be the closest race ever. If not, there can't be too many races that have since passed that. But again, he won his first race in 2001, and I won't call it a resurgence. I will just really call it of the few big moments of his career. He had his first one in 2001, and this is a pretty big deal actually, because he had a ride with Rick Hendrick driving the number 25 Budweiser car, but I think he almost got fired because he was actually injured, knowing that he was injured when he accepted the ride, and he actually had to sit out part of 1998, I believe, and I really think that Rick Hendrick almost gave him the boot, but and eventually he did. He lost his ride in 99, but then saw again his, I guess you could call it a resurgence in the end, when he came to the Tide ride. So this is Ricky Craven's autograph in this line. Tim Fedewa, here's his autograph here. Journeyman driver, I would say, in the Busch series mainly. I think he might be Kevin Harvick's spotter now. I could be mistaken for that. But beyond that though, there really isn't a whole lot. I think he was a steady hand in the Busch series, but again, I don't think he was this really deep contender for a championship, but I could be mistaken. But beyond that though, I really don't have too much to add, and here is Tim Fedewa's autograph. And here we go now with the first of 3 Greene autographs. This is going to be for David Greene. He had some success in the Busch series. I believe he won the championship driving the Slim Jim colors, and he also had some good success, I believe, in the mid-2000s driving the 37 car, the Wolf Tobacco, I believe it is, and won a couple races there, I believe. But beyond that though, for 2001, I can't remember anything he particularly did, so we're just going to go ahead and leave it at that. Solid Busch series driver, no real success, I believe, in the Cup Series, and we'll just leave it at that for David Greene. In 2000, this guy here was the dominator of the Busch Series, won the championship by 615 points, I believe. Back when they were driving a Chevrolet, they made the switch to Ford in 2001, and I believe that even though they won the championship that year by so many points, the team still lost money. So it shows just how, you know, really, to be honest, even back when NASCAR was popular, it was very hard to turn a profit with these expensive vehicles. But nonetheless, though, in 2001, he had a shot at the championship. But in fact, I think had it not been for a late race restart when NASCAR was trying to, this was before they had the overtime rule. They were trying to restart the race with 1 lap to go, and I think he wound up breaking a transmission or something like that. Had he been able to finish where he was at, which I think it might have been actually for the lead, for the win, had he been allowed just to keep that position and then go on to Homestead, had Kevin Harvick had his troubles at Homestead, he might have been able to repeat as champion, but that was not to be. And so here is Jeff Greene's autograph line. Solid Busch Series driver, which would eventually go to Richard Childress Racing, drive the 30 AOL car, and he wouldn't really produce very much for that. And that will do it for Jeff Greene's autograph. And then quickly we'll do the last Greene brother in Mark Greene, and as you could tell by his uniform, he doesn't even have any sponsorship. Really don't have too much to add for that. In fact, I really don't remember anything of note for Mark Greene, so we'll just go ahead and leave it as a quick showcase right there for his autograph. Now here's a tragic autograph that we have to showcase for you all. It is for Kevin Grubb, and the reason why it's tragic is because, as I said, there's going to be several drivers who have since died, but in his instance, unfortunately, he is actually a victim of suicide. He committed suicide, I believe, back in 2005 or 6 or somewhere around that range, and I don't know if it had to do with the fact he couldn't get a ride in NASCAR, but if that is the case, it shows just how dedicated he was to the sport. And he is driving the actual Wolf tobacco, but they seem to have censored that, much like they did with the Stacey Compton uniform. But still, for Kevin Grubb, you may know him for driving the Toys R Us car, the 54 car, but of course he apparently was not able to get the career that he wanted, because I don't think he would have committed suicide under that circumstance. But as with that, we'll just leave it for Kevin Grubb, the late Kevin Grubb. If you have any issues, ladies and gentlemen, always try to find help, because it's not cool to kill yourself, pretty much. And speaking of drivers who have since died, this is another driver here, and this one is going to be for Bobby Hamilton. In 2001, he won that Talladega race that featured no cautions as the first restrictor plate race after Dale Earnhardt's death. Unfortunately for Mr. Hamilton, he died of head and neck cancer, I believe, in 2007, within a week or so of Benny Parsons' death, who was a famous commentator and championship driver from back in '73, I believe. But for Bobby Hamilton, he would have some success in the mid-2000s, driving in the Truck Series, winning a championship, I believe. And his death was pretty sudden. All of a sudden he gets his cancer, and I think within a year he's gone. So always be checking up on your health, ladies and gentlemen, because it doesn't matter how famous you may be, death could come after you pretty quick. So always try to take care of your health, ladies and gentlemen. And this will do it for Bobby Hamilton. And here we go now, ladies and gentlemen, with the 2001 champion of the Busch Series, and that is for Kevin Harvick in his AC Delco uniform. And what can you say? In 2001, he did pretty much as best as you can do for a rookie. He did double duty the entire season after the death of Dale Earnhardt, and he wound up winning the championship in the Busch Series and did very well in the Cup Series, driving for the 29 car. And still to this day, he should have been driving the number 3 car at that Richmond or that Rockingham race on down. When we die, we don't take any of our possessions with us, and even for Dale Earnhardt Sr., that was his car, his legacy. But when something like that happens, you don't really have an opportunity to kind of dictate how things are handed out. So really should have been just passing the baton. All right, I made the legacy with this vehicle, now see what you can do about it. The fact that they waited until Austin Dillon, Richard Childress' grandson, in order to take over the 3, It's embarrassing. So really, to be honest, this should have been the guy driving the 3 car for all those years with Richard Childress. But nonetheless, though, this is the one of 2 autographs that we're going to showcase for Kevin Harvick. This is his Busch Series autograph, featuring him in his AC Delco uniform, and that'll do it for his Busch Series autograph. And here we go, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, there will be 2 autographs for Kevin Harvick, and for some of you, this might be the bittersweet autograph of the line, because this here, ladies and gentlemen, would have been the autograph that Dale Earnhardt would have signed had he survived. As you can see here, this now features Kevin Harvick in his GM Goodwrench uniform on the Winston Cup side, and I guess Press Pass felt it necessary, since he had taken over for Dale Earnhardt Sr., that they go ahead and add Kevin Harvick's autograph again, but this time featuring his Winston Cup uniform. He would do very well in the 2001 campaign. He would win twice that year, of course the most famous with the Atlanta race. He'd win the debut race over at Chicagoland, and I believe would finish 9th in the point standings despite not even making the Daytona 500, obviously. So very good season from both ends for Kevin Harvick, and would establish himself consistently as a championship contender. In fact, had it been just a standard 36 race championship season points deal, he would have been a multi-time champion before his actual first championship in 2014. So that will do it for Kevin Harvick's autographs. And so let's go on down to this driver right here. This is for Ron Hornaday Jr. Truck Series ace, would win multiple championships there. And in 2001, he took the number 14 ride to the Conseco Financial Solutions, I believe it was called, sponsored car. He's driving for AJ Foyt here. The team had driven with Mike Bliss, I think, the year before, if I'm not mistaken. Didn't produce very good results. 2001 would be likewise. I think the team would pretty much, I won't say shut down, but I think they pretty much would go out and become a Busch Series team after that. Did not have very much success. I believe he crashed out of the qualifying race for the Daytona 500. So I don't know if he actually got the race in that race or not. But funny thing about Ron Hornaday Jr. is I believe he is the one driver who actually did confess to using anabolic steroids. I believe he had some sort of pain in his leg, and he was rubbing a cream that apparently was an anabolic steroid. This was in the height of the Barry Bonds and all the Balco cases that was going on in the stick and ball sports. So that's the only reason why I know that. But he was pretty upset, I believe. He felt that if you listen to his Dale Jr. podcast, there may have at least been an idea in his mind that he may have been what Michael Waltrip would eventually become, driving the number 15 car, as that old number 3 Busch Series Napa team was upgraded to the Cup Series in the 15 car. And so he may have felt that he was supposed to be in line for that ride, but was kind of pushed out because of politics, if you will. But regardless, though, multi-time champion in the Truck Series ace, and would be very competitive, I believe, in the Busch Series. But as for the Cup side, he was one of those guys that just could not complete the trifecta. And this will do it for Ron Hornaday Jr. And here's a good autograph that is featuring a little bit of that faded sun bleach effect that I like to call. But this will do it for Dale Jarrett here. Dale Jarrett, who was the '99 champion and was a title contender for some of 2000, winning the 2000 Daytona 500 in one of the sorriest races that you'll ever watch. But in 2001, they switched from the old red, white, and blue Ford Quality Care red carpet lease vehicle, and they switched the sponsorship to UPS and became the What Can Brown Do, or rather Drive the Truck or something like that. Some sort of initiative was set there for Dale Jarrett. He would see the downward decline of his career from the mid-2000s on down. I think he would retire completely in 2007 after the first 5 races. He would switch to even driving a Toyota team with Michael Waltrip Racing, but it was a slow downhill slide in 2001. He was still competitive, won I believe 5 races, so it's not like he just vanished out into thin air. But I believe after 2003, he really would not finish all that great. Would win again, I think, in 2005 at a Talladega race, but beyond that, though, that would pretty much seal the deal for the competitive championship caliber driver that once was Dale Jarrett. But still, nonetheless, excellent driver, multi-time winner of the Daytona 500. probably Ford's best shot at winning a restrictor plate race for many years, and Hall of Fame career. What can you say for Dale Jarrett? And here we go now with Buckshot Jones. Buckshot Jones, I remember him more for driving the 00 Aquafresh car in the Busch series. Got the nod to go drive the number 44 Georgia Pacific vehicle, Dodge, in the Cup Series for Richard Petty Racing, and really just did not produce. I don't think he even made a lot of the races that he was in, but was able to stay with that team for a little bit, considering the fact that they didn't make a whole lot of races. So nonetheless, though, like I said, I remember him more for his Busch Series days. Didn't compete very well in the Cup Series. In fact, when it comes to that 44 car, well, actually, I'll save that for another driver. We'll tell that story here in a little bit. But nonetheless, though, here is Buckshot Jones' addition into this line. Moving right along, we are now going to Jason Keller. Jason Keller was a Busch Series ace, if you will, for several years. In fact, I believe 2002 would be his most competitive year for the championship. In 2000, I think he would finish second to his teammate Jeff Greene for the 2000 title, but again, he lost it by 615 points, which would be like today if a driver was to win a championship by 150 or even 200 points in today's point system. So he was completely blown out. 2001, I think he would also contend for a title in a way, but would be the ones who would falter into the mid pack of the top 10. But still, better known for his days in the Busch Series than anything else. And that'll pretty much do it for Jason Keller, driving at the time the Albertsons. I remember him a little bit from the old wrestling days, driving the number 57 Slim Jim car with the Halloween Havoc paint scheme. But here you go, Jason Keller. And here we go now for a fan favorite for some, Matt Kenseth. Matt Kenseth, of course, would see the peak of his career in 2013, or 2003 rather. He would win the championship so dominantly that he would actually cause Brian France to say, listen, we need to have a point system where there's a playoff. But in 2001, though, he's following up from 2000's Rookie of the Year campaign. He won the Coke 600 in 2000. And in 2001, I'm not sure exactly if he won any races in 2001. He may have, but I don't have the resources to know just yet. But of course, he would be slowly going on the rise. But when you're talking about his career with in 2000 racing against Dale Earnhardt Jr. Jr. got all the notoriety, he got all the fame, but Matt Kenseth was the driver's driver who would be there to win races and eventually, as I said, win championships and multiple times be a true contender for a championship. Pretty much was competitive all the way up until his last race and Hall of Fame career for the Wisconsin native. And that will do it for Matt Kenseth autograph. Here is Bobby Labonte's autograph for this set, and I would have to say, if anything else, he probably exemplifies a driver that was a hot shot who peaked in 99, and in 2000 he won the 2000 championship. So in 2001 he was a defending champion and really wasn't anywhere near in title contention the whole year. He would still win multiple races, but he was a guy who, I would say, he peaked up real fast and then he peaked downward, but even when he peaked downward he was still competitive. But at the same time, from being a threat to be a champion to not being a championship threat anymore and dropping like that the quickest, I would say it would have to go to Bobby Labonte, is probably the most notable, but still nonetheless very competitive. From 2001 though, I would have to say his biggest memory that I have of him from 2001 was him actually being silently pissed off, because he was the type of guy with dry humor and everything, and being the most pissed off at Tony Stewart when at that Talladega race where they could have tag team up on Dale Jr. and won that race. He was actually abandoned by Tony Stewart, and Bobby Labonte ended up getting flipped over at that fall Talladega race. So that's actually the biggest moment of 2001 I have for Bobby Labonte. But still, Hall of Fame career. I believe he's an analyst now for Fox, and that'll do it for the defending champion in 2001, Bobby Labonte. Here is one of the hardest autographs that was for me to collect, and that is for Terry Labonte. And this autograph right here is for the champion of 1996 and 1984. This was a guy who probably peaked in the mid to late 1990s, but still had enough momentum to make it through to about 2005 before he would be a part-time driver. And I think he would really kind of just drive just because he didn't know anything else to do, because he would drive for some pretty subpar teams into the late 2000s. I think eventually retiring in 2012 rather, from driving all around. But Texas Terry, fan favorite, very quiet guy, much like his brother, dry sense of humor, and he was just a driver's driver, a relic from the good old days of NASCAR. And that will do it for Terry Labonte's addition to this set. Randy Lajoie will be our next addition here, and this is a guy who peaked in the mid-2000s, or not mid-2000s, but rather mid-1990s in the Busch Series ace. Won the 96 and 97 championship. Then this was before Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s ascent into the Busch Series. And really, to be honest, I think the one thing I remember from 2000s with Randy Lajoie is that I think he actually got busted smoking pot or something like that when he was trying to be a spotter for his son, I believe, and was actually told to sit at home for a little bit, some time out. But beyond that, though, still a race contender for wins in individual races in the early 2000s, but I believe also he would eventually falter, and is actually more known now, I think, for building race seats more than he is probably for his racing career, which depending on who you ask may or may not be a shameful thing, if you will. But Randy Lajoie's addition into this line for the 96 and 97 Busch Series champion. Now here comes an autograph that may be, for some of you who may have been Kenny Irwin Jr. fans, may be bittersweet. And here is Jason Leffler. And speaking of Kenny Irwin Jr., Jason Leffler is also dead. He died in a sprint car accident several years ago, in I believe the early 2010s. And the reason why I say this might have been for Kenny Irwin Jr. is that he was driving the 42 Bell South car, and this is what the 01 Singular Dodge team became. So had Kenny Irwin Jr. survived, he may have been allowed to drive for the 2001 year with Chip Ganassi Racing, and it may have been the shot in the arm this team needed. But I think this team would eventually fold up, I believe, in 2001, I believe. The results just simply weren't there. He would be released at some point, I believe. But one of the best paint schemes of 2001, I would say, would go to Jason Leffler. But beyond that, though, 2001 wasn't very kind in terms of results. But here is the late Jason Leffler's autograph into this set. And here is a quick autograph for Chad Little. Chad Little was a journeyman driver. I'm going to go out and say it. Probably best known for his time as driving the John Deere vehicle, perhaps also in the Busch Series and into the Cup Series as well. Had a second place finish, I think, one time in Texas in '98. But beyond that, though, I think in 2000 he would actually lose his ride to Kurt Busch in the final few races of the season of 2000 season. So Chad Little, journeyman driver, father of Jesse Little, I believe, and that will do it. Now this is a guy who would peak heavily in 2001 and 2002, but 2001 was not very kind to Sterling Marlin at the start. Dale Earnhardt Sr. was blocking everybody he could at the start, near the finish of the 2001 Daytona 500, and coming into the last couple turns, he had 7 guys on top of him, and simply the aerodynamics of the rear of the car just caused the car to get light. Dale Earnhardt Sr. lost control, and the car that he kind of bumped as before he shot up to hit the wall was with Sterling Marlin's car, and a lot of people would blame him for Dale Sr.'s death. He would get death threats and everything else. So unfortunately he had to deal with that. But as for 2001, he, with Chip Ganassi Racing, would switch over to Dodge, and that would absolutely be the shot in the arm that they needed. And he would actually be the first driver to win again in a Dodge for the 2001 year. I believe it was the rained out Michigan race that would shut down early. In 2002, he was the title winner. he was going to win the championship in 2002 before he had that serious accident at Richmond, which would only be exacerbated by another accident in Kansas. But it was actually that accident in Richmond that caused his injury, and after that, I mean, he would never be even pretty much a winner or a contender even for individual wins, much less actual championship. So Sterling Marlin, what could have been, and here is his autograph for this set. And here is the last autograph that I needed to complete this set, really. Although technically, as I said, that Jeff Greene was the last to be included. That was actually just a mishap on my part. But here with Mark Martin, this was really the last autograph that I needed. And thankfully, a nice lady on Facebook was able to assist me in securing this card here. It is for Mark Martin, as I said, 2001. Maybe a little bit funny for some of you. He actually got to drive the Viagra car after several years of driving the famous Valvoline colors. That's just how money is. You know, I guess Viagra wanted in, and so they made a big shot to go after Mark Martin. He would have some success, I'm sure, in 2001. I don't remember if he won a race in 2001. If he did, I'm sure you guys who are Mark Martin fans will know. 2002, he would return to be a championship contender, finishing second to Tony Stewart, leading all the way to the end of the season, but just never really had a shot to win the championship at Homestead, but would be at least a contender all the way till the end. A fitness freak, and his fitness, I believe, really helped prolong his career. He would kind of step back in a way in 2006, or was supposed to retire in 2005, at the end of 2005, but stayed on to 2006. And then 2007 kind of stepped back a little bit. Rick Hendrick called him up to drive the number 5 car and would have much more success, I believe, still winning races, Hall of Fame career, but it would always be a bridesmaid. And of course, look at the 1990 Richmond infraction, I believe, that many call the screw job by NASCAR that may have cost him the championship. So regardless though, Mark Martin, Hall of Fame career, and not much else you could say. Excellent career for Mark Martin. Jeremy Mayfield's addition to this autograph line, unfortunately, 2001 wouldn't be too kind. After being the young gun of the Penske bunch, being a teammate to Rusty Wallace, Rusty Wallace has admitted that he was never really a good teammate. You know, still a lot of that old guard where a lot of the teams were single teams and it was just pretty much everybody for themselves. He would have some success with Roger Penske, would win several races with them. In fact, he won both Pocono races, if I'm not mistaken, in 2000, famously bumping Dale Earnhardt out of the way to win one of those races. However, in 2001, he would actually be released with about 10 races to go from the number 12 car, but then I think he would have a little bit more of a resurgence with the Dodge number 19 car, filling in for Casey Atwood that we talked about earlier. But then would suffer from drug abuse, allegedly, failed drug tests and everything would essentially get him banned from NASCAR, and it never really improved for Jeremy Mayfield. In fact, I think he owed the bank money, and they seized the property and actually burnt down the house that he was living in, because all they wanted was just the property, not the house. So the example of NASCAR's downfall, fame and fortune could be quite a cruel lady. So this is Jeremy Mayfield's addition to this set. Magic Shoes and Mike Mclaughlin will be next. This is a journeyman driver from the Busch series. Did have a decent run in 2001. I think he actually drove for Joe Gibbs and won the Talladega race in the spring. But beyond that, though, he never really produced much else. I think he was supposed to be part of a failed venture of a race team, Angela Racing or something like that, that got into trouble with embezzling or something like that. So unfortunately, Mike Mclaughlin was a victim of that. And beyond that, though, we're just going to leave it at that, because I'm sure he's a good guy. So that is Mike McLaughlin's autograph. And so here we go now with the next autograph. Is going to be for Jerry Nadeau, and this autograph right here is a sad one because he did not die, but he almost died. In 2001, though, he was in line, I believe, to win maybe the fall Atlanta race, but he ran out of gas, I believe, and that cost him the win. 2000, he had his first win in the Atlanta Fall race. The last race for what was then the classic ESPN that I think a lot of us remember if we were growing up in the 90s, or for those who may have been NASCAR fans during the boom period, the classic ESPN, Bob Jenkins, Ned Jarrett, Benny Parsons in the booth, that type of stuff. However, for Jerry Nadeau here in 2003, he would get into a practice accident at Richmond. The driver's side of his 01 Army car would go into the wall, and it's believed that his helmet actually banged up against the wall itself, and it would cause a brain injury, and he would not race after that. And also, I believe in 2003, or that might have been in 2004, I'm not sure, but in 2003, he was driving, or in 2002, excuse me, I'm getting my stats here wrong. In 2002, he would be driving going back to Buckshot Jones autograph, he would be driving at Simona and driving that 44 car, and he had the win locked up, but then the rear end gear failed with literally, I think, 1 lap to go. So very tragic for Jerry Nadeau, one of those guys that perhaps could have had a little bit more success. I don't know if he ever would have been a championship contender, but certainly could have had a couple more wins, I think. So we'll just leave it at that for Jerry Nadeau. Here we go now with Front Row Joe's autograph. This is the father of John Hunter Nemechek. In 2001, I think he actually won the Fall Rockingham race. I could be mistaken, but I have a feeling that he did. But regardless, though, he was known in the late 90s for always qualifying a lot on the pole. Was a self-made guy, if you will, from the standpoint of always driving for his own teams for the most part, driving the old Burger King 87 car, and even in the Busch series, driving the Bell South 87. I think he did then switch over to Felix Sabates Racing, won his first race at New Hampshire in '98, I believe, and then would go on to Andy Petrie Racing, where I believe, as I said, he won the 2001 Fall Rockingham race. Would have a little bit more success with Rick Hendrick taking over after Jerry Nadeau. And beyond that, though, he would also win, I believe, a race for MB2 Racing at Kansas in a side-by-side battle for the Kansas race with Ricky Rudd. But beyond that, though, that will do it for Joe Nemechek's autograph in this line. And at the time, this was probably a very good autograph to get your hands on. This is for Ryan Newman. Of course, he was even the younger gun of the Roger Penske stable in 2001. He would race in multiple races, but he would still stay below that 7 race limit to maintain his rookie status for 2002, in which he would actually defeat Jimmy Johnson in gaining the Rookie of the Year honors. But I think we all know who ultimately won the career race, if you will, from that standpoint. He would show many glimpses of hope as a solid driver, which he would fulfill. I think even in 2003 he won 8 races, so he is certainly the Rocket. I don't believe he was ever in any real threat for a championship, though. He had the capability to win races, but he just did not have the stability to the consistency, I should say, to win a championship. But still, Ryan Newman, still very popular to this day, and that will do it for his autograph. Got about 15 more autographs to go. Hopefully you guys are enjoying what you're seeing here, and we're going to go off to our next autograph here with Hank Parker Jr. And the only thing I could say for Hank Parker Jr. is that I don't know what happened to him. I know there was a little bit of buzz for him in the early 2000s, but then it just vanished. I don't know if he just decided to abandon everything or something went wrong. But I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at that because I don't have too much information to give you all. And so we're just going to leave it at that for Hank Parker Jr.'s autograph. And so here's another bittersweet autograph. This is going to be for Kyle Petty, and that this would have been Adam Petty's autograph had he survived his accident and lived on to race in 2001. Of course, Adam Petty was killed in the New Hampshire practice Busch race in the spring, and was the first of the 3 big deaths of 2000 before, of course, Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s death in 2001. So this was the year, if you will, from beginning to end of just the exposure of the head and neck, and how the cars were just getting too hard and there was just nothing protecting these guys' necks, and they were just pretty much popping around. So unfortunately for Adam Petty, he was the first to go in that situation. So Kyle Petty here, his father took over his ride. Richard Petty Racing went and switched the Dodge from the GM Pontiac, and there's really not much else to say. He really didn't have very much success, and probably stayed his welcome a little bit longer than he should have, simply because he was Richard Petty's son. Probably should have passed that ride along to somebody else, because I think his prime for Kyle Petty was probably 95. So that will pretty much do it. I'm just going to leave it at that for Kyle Petty. Here we go, journeyman driver, Robert Presley. Not much else to say. I'm trying to think of anything that he did of significance. I think he may have won a pole in 2001 maybe, but I'm not sure. But beyond that though, I really don't have much else to say. I remember Robert Presley more for driving a 33 car after Harry Gant retired, that Skull Bandit car. But beyond that though, Robert Presley, journeyman driver autograph. Another journeyman driver, we're going to give this to Tony Raines. Tony Raines, I think his most famous ride in the Cup Series came really from the Hall of Fame ride that they tried to put their name upon. I don't know if he was just cheap and he was willing to do it, or they really wanted somebody with some experience, but unfortunately that ride did not produce any real results for him. And beyond that, I'm not sure. I know he drove in the Truck Series, and as for anything in 2001, I simply don't have the memory to remember anything significant that he may have done. So we're just going to go ahead and leave it at that for Tony Raines. And so you want to talk about a guy with peaks and valleys and everything. I believe that cannot be exemplified any better than what this guy right here did in 2001. This is for Ricky Rudd, who drove the number 28 Texaco Havoline vehicle. In fact, this was the last year where he had that famous black and red colors that was made famous by Davey Allison and Ernie Irvin. Before Chevron came into play, and it became like Chevron Texaco, and they made the colors yellow and everything else like that for 2002 and the like. But with that said, in 2001, Ricky Rudd was the primary contender for the title from Jeff Gordon. Although he was always distantly behind, he was still somewhat within range. But then he just fell off the face of the earth near the end of 2001 and came from second to fourth in points. So and after that, he would never really be in contention again. I personally know him more for his days driving the Tide Ride and the number 10 car that he personally owned. Had a streak for some time where he won at least one race, I believe for 14 seasons straight, which eventually would fall in 1999, I believe, is when it came down. Drove for Robert Yates in 2000, and again in 2001 and 2002, and then I think in 2003, I think he may have actually made the drop and then switched teams to Wood Brothers. So nonetheless though, Ricky Rudd, Hall of Fame career. And I believe when we look at Panini in today's, as of this video, of course, we see Jeff Gordon has never signed any autographs with Panini. Ricky Rudd is also one of those drivers who really hasn't even touched Panini when it comes to autographs and whatnot. So pretty hard to actually get his autographs nowadays. So if you want one, you got to go back to the old press pass days, it looks like, for good old Ricky Rudd. Elliott Sadler, 2001, I would say it's a year where he was paying his dues, but this would kind of be a breakout year in a way that he did win the spring Bristol race. But at the same time, I think looking back at that race, unfortunately, this was an example of Goodyear making those hard tires to where you could race 160 laps at Bristol with virtually no fall off, and you start losing that ability for the race to kind of change the dynamic of it. If you want to have guys pitting or not pitting, it just started becoming a position where, you know, just stay out, the tires really don't fall off all that much. But regardless though, he did win that race in 2001, and I would just say it's more of a dues paying deal before he would get his ride with the 38 M&M's vehicle with Robert Yates and really start to kick off his career, I think, winning several races driving that vehicle. And that will do it here for Elliott Sadler. Elton Sawyer will be our next autograph. Elton Sawyer, in fact, I believe this is unlike Danica and Ricky Stenhouse Jr., this is actually a racing romance that did work out. I believe he did marry another female NASCAR driver by name of Patty Moise, and so that's what I know Elton Sawyer the most for. I believe now he's more of an R&D guy with NASCAR, but beyond that, though, his racing career did not really produce very much, and so we're just going to leave it at that, being Patty Moise's husband and for driving in 2001. Here we go now with a fan favorite, and Ken Schrader. Ken Schrader, I believe he actually won a popularity contest to be one of the drivers added into the All-Star race, even though they didn't qualify for it. 2001 wouldn't start off very well for him. In fact, the whole year wouldn't be all that great, but of course, when Dale Earnhardt was killed, he was the first driver, actually the first person to reach Dale Sr., so he actually got to see the aftermath of his injuries. And for Ken Schrader, however, never really a title contender. I believe his last victory was back in 1990, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a lot of, but still, nonetheless, for a driver who didn't have that many wins, he still was very much a fan favorite, a competitor, and just a racer's racer. You know, one of those old school guys that really you're not going to be able to find anymore with NASCAR, unfortunately, because it is all virtually PC and all just you know, just whoever can bring sponsorship as opposed to who could really bring people to the seats and really relate to the fans and whatnot. So good old Ken Schrader, and we'll leave it at that. Here we go with Jimmy Spencer's autograph, and I think I would say 2001 would be the last year that would be really competitive for Jimmy Spencer. He would win several poles, I believe, driving the 26 big Kmart. Of course, as I said, the team would pretty much fold up after the second race in 2002, but he would actually make the switch in time to get out of that sinking boat to Chip Ganassi Racing. However, he would not qualify for the 2002 Daytona 500 driving that new Target team. But nonetheless, though, for Jimmy Spencer, this would be the last full-time season, I think, actually, for him, because as I said, he would miss the Daytona 500 the next year, and then in 2003 he got into that scuffle with Kurt Busch. And he was actually suspended, and then 2004 I think he just became a journeyman driver, and then he had to go downgrade, if you will, to the truck series where he would have some more success. But 2001, I believe, now that I look back at it, might have been the last year that he had a lot of a full-time season in Cup where he actually had a somewhat competitive ride. So we'll just go ahead and leave it at that for Mr. Excitement, Jimmy Spencer. And so here we go now with Tony Stewart's addition to this autograph line. And again, unfortunately, we have a good autograph here that has a little bit of that faded look. The autograph is not particularly blue. It looks like it's been exposed to sunlight. But we have a little bit of medicine to showcase to you all for that here in a little bit. But for Tony Stewart, he was always a title contender, I think, from the very first race that he got into the Cup Series. Won Rookie of the Year in 1999. 2000 was a solid year. 2001, he had that flip at Daytona. And then, of course, in 2002, he'd win the first of 3 championships and would be relatively dominant and a title contender up until about maybe 2 years before he retired. I think in 2014 he really faltered, and then of course he got into a lot of trouble, breaking his leg in that Sprint Cup crash, and then of course had the incident with the kid that he ran over. So temperamental certainly, but Hall of Fame numbers nonetheless, and that will do it for Tony Stewart's edition. We're almost there, ladies and gentlemen. Got about that much left to showcase to you all, so we are about to hit the end. Remember to hit the like and subscribe to Cards That Diecast 4. And so we're going to go ahead and showcase now Rusty Wallace. Rusty Wallace's career, I believe, peaked in the 90s, driving that black Miller Genuine Draft Ford or / Pontiac. In fact, he won 10 races in his last year with Pontiac. and was a title contender for some of the early 2000s, or rather the early 1990 seasons, won the '89 championship, but then in 2001, I believe, much like the couple seasons beforehand, '98 actually might have been Rusty's last year where he showed real true value as a championship contender, but he never had consistency. That was Rusty's always his big deal. He never had consistency. I know in '98 he finished in the top 5 the first 5 races and was a title contender for the majority of it until again the consistency deal started to break down on him. And in 2001 he would win what was likely going to be his last race at California that year. He would not win again until 2004 at Martinsville and retire in 2005. If you listen to the Darrell Jr. podcast that he had, he originally if he had the ability to go back in time, probably would have stayed racing until about 2008. But it was Dr. Jerry Punch, I believe, who started bringing up the idea of retirement, and it looks like he may have been pushed to retirement a little bit too early, but still, Rusty Wallace, he had his fans, he had his detractors, but he was always a Hall of Fame guy. So Rusty Wallace autograph. Here we go now with Darrell Waltrip, who was in his first year of retirement, his last year with the Travis Carter number 66 Big K car that Todd Bodine that we showed earlier. That's the driver who took over for his ride. Was terrible, always having to rely on those past champions provisionals. He finished second, or he started second at the Brickyard in 2000, and there was supposedly a scuttlebutt going around that Ricky Rudd was the only driver who would not agree to winning a pole, or rather letting DW win the pole for that race, and so he would go ahead and win it. And then, of course, Darrell Waltrip said I think he wanted to just lead one lap, but as soon as the race started, he immediately went backwards. So his last few years in racing were certainly bad. I think his last notable season might have been in '95. 94, 95, and then after that he was probably one of those drivers who probably should have hung it up a couple years prior to what he did. But still, one of the best drivers ever, 3 titles, I think 83 or 84 wins, and there's really not much else you could say. Hall of Fame driver, now even retired from the Fox booth, and so that will do it for good old DW. And here is Michael Waltrip, probably prior to him being notified that Dale Earnhardt had died, of course, wear the Daytona 500 hat that he won. Would always be a restrictor plate threat in the early 2000s, but beyond that, though, I think he did finish second at Homestead later that year. But other than that, there's only 4 restrictor plate races on the season. You got to be able to be more competitive at the rest of the races. But would, I believe, be probably one of the more popular drivers, and also would always be in those funny commercials and everything else. So he was always a salesman, but in terms of results, he just did not produce those. But then again, this is early 2000s, and NASCAR was absolutely booming, so you didn't even necessarily have to have the best results in order to have good sponsorship behind you. So here we go, Michael Waltrip's autograph. And this here will be our last autograph that we will showcase before we go to this few drivers that I set aside, since those drivers were special. And this one here is for now the late Robert Yates, who I believe also died of colon cancer, I believe, but I could be mistaken, but it certainly was a cancer that killed him. And in fact, the last couple public images of him, he looked very gaunt, very skinny. You know, cancer's terrible, but boy, it seems to be one of the best diet pills out there, because it'll make you look skin and bones, unfortunately. Robert Yates, of course, he was the team owner. Davey Allison, Ernie Irvin with the 28 car, even Kenny Irwin Jr. for a time, Ricky Rudd, Dale Jarrett, Elliott Sadler into the 2000s. He produced many winners. Only got 1 championship, I believe, when it came with Dale Jarrett in '99, but still one of the best crew chiefs, or rather team operators, I should say, owners, that has existed. A Hall of Fame guy, and pretty much nothing else that you could say there. Robert Yates, another guy, probably gone a little bit too soon, and we'll just go ahead and leave it at that. And finally, here we go with the drivers that I have set aside, and the first one will be for the king himself, Richard Petty. Richard Petty, 7-time champion. This is at a time where NASCAR was really beaten a lot of the other stick and ball sports and the ratings and in popularity and everything else. And so at the time in 2001, he was a team owner for the 43, the 44, and the 45 car. And even though all three of those teams weren't really the best teams out there, his name alone was able to secure a lot of sponsorship, in my belief. And here's his fine autograph, one of the best autographs in all of sports, legible, you can actually read it. And what else can you say about the King, Richard Petty? Very, very happy to have this autograph indeed. And so our next driver that I set aside is going to be for none other than Dale Earnhardt Jr., who I guess got a special marker because his autograph is much thicker than the other drivers. Dale Earnhardt Jr., what can you say about the guy in 2001? He pretty much had to take over for his father as the most popular individual in the sport. Jeff Gordon probably could have had that mantle, but I think he actually wound up just passing it to Dale Jr., to be honest. And he brought his own individual group of fans into the sport, I believe, and probably would still be racing as of this video had it not been for his being prone to concussions. I think the California race in 2002 was one of his first big ones that he had, and he would just keep it quiet. You know, this is back still when he had that true grit of men, but also when you have true grit, you tend to be very stupid. You don't confess to your weaknesses and everything else, but things have changed now. But that will do it for Dale Earnhardt Jr. In 2001, though, this is when he really started popping out as a restrictor plate king. Of course, that big famous win in 2001, the Pepsi 400. You know, listen, I'm a conspiracy theorist on this point. I think NASCAR kind of helped his car. I don't know how they did it, but I think, to be honest, the car was a little bit too good, in my opinion. But still, restrictor plate ace, won several times at other places. But with that said, though, Dale Earnhardt Jr. And then here is the champion himself in Jeff Gordon. Jeff Gordon, there was just nobody who would touch him in 2001. He was the champion pretty much from the spring on down, and there was just no one who can compete with him. Ricky Rudd, as I said earlier, was close, but just could not have the consistency to match him, and Jeff Gordon would go on to easily win the 2001 championship. And it would be his last championship, but if the point system was allowed to be just 36 races, whoever had the most points gets the win, he would be a 7-time champion along with Richard Petty and Dale Earnhardt. So if anybody was really screwed from the point system being changed to a playoff system point deal, it was this guy right here for Jeff Gordon, driver of the number 24 car, switched from the Rainbows to the Flames, and I think that really helped secure him a pretty good championship after having a pretty bad 2000 campaign. In terms of Jeff Gordon, he finished 9th in the points. A lot of drivers would love that, but for Jeff Gordon, that just simply wasn't very efficient. And then finally, our last autograph here is an autograph that I'm cheating on, but I'm going to consider this an error autograph, so that's why I'm going to allow it, and that is going to be for A.J. Foyt, who was the owner of the number 14 car that we showed with Ron Hornaday Jr., the guy who allegedly, or actually did confess to anabolic steroid use. A.J. Foyt, not A.J. Allmendinger, A.J. Foyt here was the team owner for that Conseco car. And as you can see right there, this autograph is in gold. And normally when the autograph is in gold, that means this is supposed to be a short printed autograph to 50. But when we flip the card around, you will notice that there is no stamped number, or rather handwritten number, because the numbers were handwritten back then. So I'm going to consider this a little bit of an error card, although all the other golds may be just like that, because I think I've seen a couple other ones, and I guess maybe just Panini, or rather Press Pass, forgot to have the person go through and handwrite the out of 50 for each of these autographs. So that will do it for the complete set. Again, if you have the Steve Park or the Greg Zipadelli, please send images to me. There's contact links in the description below. All right, so let me quickly go ahead and showcase to you all the two parallels that go along with the blue signature baseline if you want to build a set of your own. We're going to need the help of AJ Foyt one more time, and it's going to be, this time we're going to showcase a special edition autograph for Tony Stewart. And as we see here, when we look at the card, it is going to be out of 100, 84 out of 100 for this specific card. But when we look at the card again, and then we take away that AJ Foyt card, you will see that the out of 100 parallel is actually transparent. So if you want to build up your set, or you want to try to build the entire deal, you'll need to get one of those transparent autographs. I wish they kind of made this the gold out of 50 that we're going to showcase here in a second, but they decided to leave it just with the transparent being out of 100. And so this is actually a pretty cool deal, an acetate finish, a little bit more sturdy. I'm sure, I don't know too much about the quality though when it comes to cars being in direct sunlight. So again, please take care of these older cards because they will dry out on you pretty quick. And then, as I said, the other parallel is going to be a gold, and this one we'll use an example for Bobby Labonte, the defending champion from his title win in 2000. And then, as you can see here, this again is a gold autograph, and when we looked at the AJ Foyt, you see it right there. Now, it's not always stamped on the front. I know with the Darrell Jr. gold autographs, they have the handwritten number on the back, but here with Bobby Labonte, they wrote it here on the front, so that will be the other parallel. So you have, again, if you want to build your own sets, if you want to go even beyond what I did, you have your blue signature, which is the base, has no number on it. You have the transparents that will be out of 100, and then you have the golds that will be out of 50, and that will do it for this video. I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember, Cards to Diecast 4 on YouTube. Please subscribe, like the video. I do make posts periodically on Facebook when it comes to selling things and such. Also on Twitter as well. That's usually where I archive a lot of my social media posts. But with that said though, ladies and gentlemen, I really hope you enjoyed this video. And with that said, I will see you all later.